A struggling farmer discovers a stray horse collapsed in his old creaking barn. Her weak body bears mysterious scars, and she's barely clinging to life. Yet when the vet arrives, what they uncover is more shocking than anyone could have imagined. An unexpected secret that will change everything. How did this desperate creature end up here? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Thunder cracked across the darkened sky as Jack Parker fought against the howling wind to secure a loose shutter. Rain pelted his face, each drop feeling like tiny needles against his weathered skin. The old farmhouse creaked and groaned under nature's assault, a sound that matched the weariness in his bones. "Just hold together," he muttered, more to himself than the house. These repairs would cost money he didn't have, but like everything else these days, he'd have to find a way. A brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and in that brief moment Jack noticed his barn door swinging wildly. His heart sank. He'd meant to fix that latch last week, but between the broken tractor and Dylan's parent-teacher conference, it had slipped his mind. Pulling his jacket tighter, Jack splashed through puddles toward the barn. The wind tried to wrestle the door from his grip as he forced it shut. Inside, the familiar scent of hay and wood was different somehow, mixed with something else, something alive. Another flash of lightning spilled through the barn's high windows, and Jack's breath caught in his throat. There, lying in a heap of wet straw, was a horse. Its dark coat glistened with rain, sides heaving with each labored breath. "Hey there," Jack said softly, approaching with careful steps. The horse's eyes, wide with fear, tracked his movement. "Easy now." Up close, Jack could see the animal's ribs clearly visible beneath its skin. The mare, he could tell it was female now, was severely underweight. His chest tightened as he knelt beside her, running a gentle hand along her neck. She was burning with fever. "You're in bad shape, girl," he whispered. The horse nickered weakly in response. Jack's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. He couldn't afford another responsibility, not with the bank breathing down his neck. But looking at those frightened eyes, he knew he couldn't turn away either. He dialed the number for the new vet in town. "Dr. Thompson, Jack Parker here. I've got an emergency at my farm." Through the static of the storm, Emma Thompson's voice came clear and professional. "What's the situation, Mr. Parker?" "Found a stray horse in my barn. She's down and won't get up. Running a fever, too. I'm on my way. Keep her warm if you can." Jack gathered every spare blanket he could find, covering the shivering mare while listening to the storm rage outside. Each minute seemed to stretch endlessly until finally, headlights cut through the darkness and he heard tires crunching on gravel. Dr. Thompson burst through the barn door, medical bag in hand, her rain jacket dripping. Her quick, efficient movement spoke of years of experience as she knelt beside the horse. "How long has she been here?" she asked, running practiced hands along the mare's body. "Just found her. Must have sought shelter from the storm." Emma's face grew increasingly serious as she continued her examination. She pulled out various instruments from her bag, working in silence while Jack held the flashlight. The barn's old light fixture flickered uncertainly above them. Finally, Emma sat back on her heels, her expression grave. "Mr. Parker, this mare is pregnant." Jack felt the words like a physical blow. "Pregnant?" "Yes, and she's severely malnourished. The strain on her body—" Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. "Honestly, I'm not sure either she or the foal will make it through the night." Jack stared at the mare, his throat tight. The animal's eyes met his, filled with a trust he wasn't sure he deserved. The weight of this unexpected responsibility pressed down on him like the storm clouds overhead. but something in those eyes wouldn't let him look away. The first hints of dawn crept through the barn windows, painting weak stripes across the straw-covered floor. Jack Parker hadn't slept at all, his mind churning with worries as relentless as the storm that had finally begun to fade. He pulled on his boots, their familiar leather creaking as he made his way back to the barn. The muddy ground sucked at his feet with each step, and puddles reflected the lightening sky. Inside the barn, he found Emma Thompson exactly where he'd left her 3 hours ago, kneeling beside the mare. Her medical bag lay open nearby, various supplies scattered around her. "You're still here," Jack said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. Emma looked up, dark circles under her eyes. "Couldn't leave her. She's fighting hard, but—" She trailed off, adjusting the IV line she'd managed to get into the horse. Jack's stomach twisted as he studied the mare's thin frame. Even under the blankets, he could see how her sides heaved with each breath. The cost of proper care would be substantial, money he didn't have. But watching her struggle stirred something deep inside him, a familiar ache he'd been trying to ignore since Sarah's passing. "Tell me straight," he said, settling onto an overturned bucket. "What are we looking at here?" Emma ran a hand through her disheveled hair. "The pregnancy complicates everything. She's severely malnourished, probably hasn't had proper food for months. Her body is trying to sustain both herself and the foal, but there's nothing left to draw from." She checked the mare's vitals again before continuing. "We're fighting dehydration, potential organ failure, and the risk of losing both mother and foal." Jack's chest tightened. "And the chances? If we euthanize now, we end her suffering." Emma's voice was gentle but professional. "But if you want to try saving her, I won't lie, it's going to be a long, difficult road. We'd need round-the-clock care for weeks, maybe months. Special feed, medications, regular checkups. Even then, there's no guarantee either of them will make it." The mare's dark eyes found Jack's, and in them, he saw something that reminded him of Sarah. His wife had always believed in fighting for the underdogs, taking in strays, healing what was broken. She'd seen beauty and possibility where others saw only lost causes. "The costs?" he forced himself to ask, though his heart had already made its decision. "Significant," Emma admitted, "but we might be able to work something out. There are programs, payment plans." Jack stood up, moving to kneel beside the horse. He placed a hand on her neck, feeling the warmth of fever beneath her coat. Sarah would have already been mapping out feeding schedules and rehabilitation plans. She would have named the mare, promised her the world. "We'll try," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever it takes, we'll try to save them both." Emma's face softened with relief and something else, respect maybe. "We'll need to start with more fluids and antibiotics," she said, already reaching for her supplies. "Then we'll work on a feeding plan that won't shock her system." The mare nickered softly, as if understanding the choice that had just been made. Outside, the storm clouds were breaking up, revealing patches of pale morning sky. Jack knew he'd just committed himself to months of struggle and uncertainty. But for the first time since finding the horse, he felt something like hope stirring in his chest. The morning sun streamed through the barn doors as Dylan Parker shuffled in, his eyes widening at the sight of the mare. He stood frozen in the doorway, hands shoved deep in his jean pockets, trying to maintain an air of indifference despite his obvious curiosity. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Jack Parker looked up from where he sat beside the horse. "Found her in the storm last night. She's in pretty rough shape." Dylan took a few steps closer, keeping his distance but studying the mare's thin frame and matted coat. Emma Thompson emerged from behind the stall, carrying empty IV bags. "You must be Dylan," she said warmly. "I'm Dr. Thompson." Dylan gave a slight nod, then leaned against a post, trying to appear casual, even as his eyes kept drifting back to the horse. "Is it dying?" "She's pregnant," Jack said quietly, "and very sick, but we're going to try to save her." Dylan's carefully constructed mask of disinterest slipped for a moment. "Pregnant?" He took another step closer to the stall. "We need to make a supply run," Emma explained, checking her phone. "The feed store opens in 30 minutes. She needs special supplements, more medical supplies." "Dylan," Jack started, "I could use your help cleaning up the barn while we're gone. Fresh straw, water." "I have plans," Dylan cut in, his voice taking on an edge. "Besides, it's not my horse." Jack's jaw tightened. "Son, I'm not asking. This is an emergency situation." "It's always an emergency on this farm," Dylan muttered. "That's why Mom—" He stopped abruptly, color rising in his cheeks. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to touch. Emma busied herself with her medical bag, giving father and son space. "Please," Jack said finally, his voice softer. "Just help me with this." Dylan stared at the ground, scuffing his shoe against the barn floor. The mare made a soft nickering sound, drawing his attention. Her dark eyes seemed to study him with gentle interest. "Fine," he said at last. "Whatever." Jack and Emma gathered their things and headed out to make the supply run. Once their footsteps faded, Dylan moved closer to the stall. The mare's ears pricked forward as he approached. Glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching, Dylan slowly extended his hand. The horse stretched her neck forward, her soft muzzle brushing against his palm. Something shifted in Dylan's expression. A crack in his careful armor of teenage indifference. "Hey," he whispered, stroking her nose gently. "You're going to be okay." His hand trembled slightly as he continued to pet her, feeling the warmth of her breath against his skin. For just a moment, he allowed himself to feel the concern he'd been trying so hard to hide. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the barn as Emma Thompson gathered her supplies. She handed Jack Parker a detailed list of care instructions, her expression serious. "Remember, small amounts of feed every few hours. We need to build her strength gradually," she explained. "Call me immediately if anything changes." After Emma left, Jack Parker stood alone with the mare. He retrieved a curry comb from the tack room and began the gentle process of cleaning her coat. As he worked, his fingers found raised lines beneath her matted fur, scars that crisscrossed her flanks like a cruel map. "What happened to you, girl?" he murmured, his throat tightening. The mare stood quietly, seeming to trust his touch despite whatever hardships she'd endured. As Jack worked his way down her side, something caught his eye. Beneath the dirt and tangles, an unusual mark stood out against her skin, a distinctive brand he'd never seen before. It wasn't the typical ranch marking he was familiar with, but rather an intricate design that seemed almost ornamental. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted his inspection. Fred Morgan's rusty pickup pulled up outside the barn, and moments later, the older man appeared in the doorway. "Brought back that post hole digger I borrowed," Fred called out, setting the tool against the wall. His eyes fixed on the horse, narrowing with sudden interest. "What's this, then? New addition?" "Found her in the storm last night," Jack replied, continuing to brush the mare's coat. "She's in rough shape." Fred Morgan moved closer, his weathered face showing calculated curiosity. "Mind if I take a look? Used to work with horses myself back in the day." Jack stepped aside, allowing his neighbor to approach. Fred's gaze locked onto the brand, and something flickered across his features. Recognition, followed by a barely concealed gleam of opportunity. "Interesting marking," Fred commented, keeping his tone casual. "Don't think I've seen one quite like that around here." Jack noticed the change in Fred's demeanor, but couldn't quite place its meaning. No, it's unusual. Wonder where she came from. Hard to say, Fred replied, backing away from the stall. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check the time. Instead, he quickly snapped a photo when Jack turned to hang up the curry comb. Well, better get going. Thanks for the loan of the tool. Fred Morgan hurried back to his truck, his mind already racing with possibilities. He remembered the circus that had passed through the county last summer, their prized horses, and the substantial rewards they offered for missing stock. That distinctive brand could mean a profitable tip-off if he played his cards right. Jack watched Fred's departure through the barn door, an uneasy feeling settling in his stomach. Something about his neighbor's behavior felt off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what. The mare nickered softly behind him, drawing his attention back to her care. Jack Parker slumped into his worn leather chair at the kitchen table, his body heavy with exhaustion. The events of the past 24 hours had left him drained. Scattered across the wooden surface were stacks of envelopes, most of them bearing red, final notice stamps. His calloused hands trembled slightly as he opened another bill. The numbers seemed to swim before his tired eyes. Property taxes, equipment payments, feed costs, and worst of all, 3 months of overdue mortgage payments. The total made his stomach clench. "This can't go on," he muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. His gaze drifted to the window, where his old tractor sat rusting in the yard. It wasn't worth much, but selling it might buy him a month's breathing room. The thought of his small herd of cattle crossed his mind. Maybe he could part with a few head to stay afloat. With a deep sigh, Jack reached for his phone and dialed Emma Thompson's number. She answered on the second ring. "Emma, it's Jack Parker. I need to know what we're looking at here, cost-wise for the mare's treatment." There was a pause on the other end. "Well," Emma began carefully, "given her condition and the pregnancy, we're talking about specialized feed, regular blood work, medications." She outlined the estimated expenses, each item making Jack's heart sink further. "I can offer you a significant discount on my services," Emma added quickly, "and I'm happy to donate my time for regular checkups. But even then, Jack, I won't sugarcoat it. It won't be cheap." Jack's free hand clenched into a fist on the table. "I appreciate that, Emma, but even with the discounts—" "I know it's a lot to consider," Emma interrupted gently. "But Jack, I've seen how you are with her. That mare has given you something to fight for. I could see it in your eyes this morning. Sometimes having a purpose is worth more than money." Her words hit home, making Jack's throat tighten unexpectedly. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the old red barn where the mare rested. The afternoon sun painted the weathered boards in warm hues, reminding him of countless evenings spent there with his late wife, tending to their animals. "I hear you," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "But I can't lose this farm, Emma. It's all I have left to give my son." "I understand," Emma replied softly. "Take some time to think it through. We'll figure something out." After hanging up, Jack remained at the window, watching shadows lengthen across the farmyard. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical burden. The mare represented both hope and risk, a chance to save something precious, but at the potential cost of everything he'd worked his whole life to preserve. The barn creaked in the darkness as Dylan Parker carefully pushed open the heavy wooden door. His flashlight beam bounced across the dusty floor, illuminating scattered pieces of hay. The 15-year-old's heart pounded. He wasn't supposed to be here this late, but something had drawn him to check on the mare. "Hey there," he whispered, approaching the stall where the horse lay in the fresh bedding. Her large brown eyes reflected the flashlight's glow as she lifted her head to look at him. Dylan reached into his pocket and pulled out several sugar cubes he'd taken from the kitchen. His hand trembled slightly as he held them out. The mare's soft muzzle brushed his palm, sending an unexpected wave of emotion through him. For a moment, he remembered feeding treats to their old pony with his mom, back before everything changed. "Mom would have liked you," Dylan murmured, his usual defensive mask slipping. His free hand reached out to stroke the mare's neck. "She always said animals could heal broken hearts." His voice cracked on the last words. Suddenly, the mare let out a distressed noise and struggled to stand. Her legs wobbled dangerously, and she crashed against the side of the stall. Dylan's heart leapt into his throat. "Dad!" he screamed, all thoughts of looking cool forgotten. "Dad, come quick! Something's wrong!" Jack Parker's heavy footsteps thundered across the yard. While waiting, Dylan frantically dialed Emma Thompson's number with shaking fingers. "Please, you have to come," he begged when she answered. "The mare, she can't stand up properly." Within minutes, the barn was flooded with light. Emma Thompson arrived wearing plaid pajamas under her coat, her medical bag clutched tightly. Jack Parker stood by Dylan's side, both of them watching anxiously as Emma examined the struggling horse. "Her electrolytes are dangerously low," Emma explained, quickly preparing an IV line. "The pregnancy is taking a heavy toll on her weakened body." She worked efficiently, inserting the needle and hanging the fluid bag on a makeshift hook. Dylan gripped the stall door until his knuckles turned white. "Is she going to make it? The baby too?" Emma administered a sedative, and gradually the mare's breathing steadied. "She's stabilizing," Emma assured them, checking vital signs. "Both mare and foal are still with us." Relief flooded through Dylan's body, making his legs weak. He hadn't realized how much he'd come to care about this horse in just one day. Tears pricked at his eyes, and for once, he didn't try to hide them. The mare's gentle eyes found his again, and she nickered softly. Dylan reached out to stroke her nose, no longer concerned about whether his dad saw this display of emotion. In that moment, the walls he'd built around his heart since losing his mother began to crack, just a little. The morning sun cast long shadows through the barn's open door as Emma Thompson checked the mare's vital signs one more time. Her stethoscope moved methodically across the horse's chest, while Jack and Dylan Parker stood nearby, both looking tired but alert after their sleepless night. "Her heart beats stronger today," Emma announced, letting the stethoscope hang around her neck. "But we need to be very careful with her nutrition. The next few weeks are critical." Dylan stepped closer to the stall, his usual teenage indifference nowhere in sight. "What does she need to eat?" Emma pulled out a notepad and began writing. "We'll start with small, frequent meals, high-quality hay, special feed for pregnant mares, and supplements." She handed the list to Jack, who studied it with a furrowed brow. "That's quite a list," Jack said quietly, mental calculations clearly running through his head. "I know it's a lot," Emma acknowledged, "but I can help you source everything at cost through my clinic, and I'll stop by every other day to check on her progress." Outside the barn, Fred Morgan crouched behind his rusty pickup truck, scribbling in a small notebook. He watched through the open barn door as Emma demonstrated how to measure medicine into a syringe. His weathered face twisted with conflicting emotions as he observed the gentle way Dylan stroked the mare's neck. "Poor thing's been through hell," Fred muttered to himself, noting down the details about the horse's condition. His fingers traced the circus program he dug out of his filing cabinet that morning, the one advertising Mr. Brown's famous performing horses. The mare nickered softly at Dylan, and Fred's stomach clenched with guilt. He'd seen enough abused animals to recognize the signs of mistreatment on her body. Still, the promise of reward money beckoned, money that could save his own struggling farm. Emma's voice carried across the yard. "We'll need to monitor her closely for any signs of distress. Pregnancy complications could happen at any time." Fred slipped away from the barn and climbed into his truck, driving far enough down the road to be out of earshot. His hand shook slightly as he pulled out his phone and dialed the number he'd found online for Brown's traveling circus. "Mr. Brown? This is Fred Morgan from Cedar Creek." He paused, listening. "Yes, sir. About that missing mare of yours. I believe I found her." Fred's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as Mr. Brown's excited voice crackled through the phone. "She's at the Parker place," Fred continued, his voice dropping. "But, sir, you should know. She's in rough shape. And she's pregnant." Mr. Brown's tone changed, becoming sharper. "I'll be there tomorrow to see for myself. Don't breathe a word of this to anyone, understand? There's good money in it for you if this pans out." Fred ended the call, his chest tight with regret as he watched Emma's truck pull out of the Parkers' driveway. The morning sun caught the mare's brand through the barn door, the same distinctive mark he'd seen in the circus program. There was no going back now. Jack Parker watched Fred Morgan's truck kick up dust as it disappeared down the road. Something about his neighbor's hasty departure nagged at him, but there wasn't time to dwell on it. They needed to get the mare to Emma's clinic. "Dylan, help me with the trailer," Jack called out, trying to keep his voice steady despite his growing anxiety. Dylan nodded, already holding the lead rope Emma had given him. The loading process was delicate. Emma guided the mare with gentle words and reassuring pats, while Jack and Dylan flanked her sides. The horse's legs trembled as she took tentative steps up the ramp. "Easy now, girl," Emma murmured. "You're doing great." Once inside, the mare shifted nervously, her hooves clattering against the trailer floor. Dylan climbed in beside her, his hands steady on her neck. Jack noticed how his son's usual surly expression had softened into one of genuine concern. "I'll ride back here with her," Dylan announced, surprising both his father and Emma. The drive to the clinic felt endless. Every bump in the road made Jack wince, imagining the impact on the pregnant mare. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching Dylan whisper to the horse whenever she grew restless. Emma's clinic was a modern facility on the outskirts of town. They guided the mare into a spacious examination room equipped with ultrasound machinery. The overhead lights cast a harsh glare that made the horse's ribs seem even more prominent beneath her dull coat. "This might be a little cold," Emma warned as she applied gel to the ultrasound wand. The mare tensed but remained still, as if sensing the importance of the moment. The room fell silent, except for the quiet whoosh of the ultrasound machine. Emma's face grew serious as she studied the screen, moving the wand methodically across the mare's belly. Jack held his breath, noticing Dylan doing the same. "There," Emma said finally, pointing to a flickering spot on the screen. "That's the heartbeat." Dylan leaned in closer. "Is it supposed to be that faint?" Emma's expression remained carefully neutral. "It's weaker than I'd like, but it's there. The next few weeks will be crucial for both mare and foal." Jack's momentary relief crumbled as Emma listed potential complications, placental issues, nutritional deficiencies, stress-related problems. Each possibility felt like another weight on his shoulders. The return journey was slower, more careful. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road as they approached the farm. Dylan had insisted on riding in the trailer again, humming softly to keep the mare calm. As they turned onto their property, Jack noticed an unfamiliar black car parked near Fred Morgan's place. The vehicle seemed out of place among the dusty pickup trucks and farm equipment, sleek, expensive, with tinted windows that revealed nothing of its occupant. The sight made Jack uneasy, but his focus remained on getting the mare safely back into the barn. None of them noticed the figure watching from Fred Morgan's property, or the way Mr. Brown's eyes narrowed as he observed their careful procession through his expensive binoculars. Jack Parker sat at his kitchen table, spreading out a mess of bills and invoices. The numbers blurred together, each one a reminder of the mounting costs. He rubbed his tired eyes, trying to make sense of how he could keep the farm running while paying for the mare's care. The sound of tires on gravel made him look up. Through the window, he saw Emma Thompson's pickup truck pulling into the driveway. She emerged carrying several bags of supplements and medical supplies. "I got these at cost," Emma said as she entered the kitchen, setting the bags on the counter. "The supplier owed me a favor." Jack's jaw tightened. "Emma, I can't keep accepting." "You're not accepting charity," she interrupted gently. "This is about saving 2 lives." She gestured toward the barn where the mare rested. "Besides, I've never seen a horse respond so well to treatment. She's a fighter." "The bills are still piling up," Jack admitted, his voice rough. "Feed costs, medications, your time." "My time is my choice," Emma said firmly. "I believe in what we're doing here." Unknown to them, Dylan stood in the hallway, listening. His father's worried voice made his stomach twist. "The bank's breathing down my neck about the mortgage," Jack continued. "I might have to sell some equipment just to keep up with the payments." Dylan's chest tightened. He thought about all the times he'd refused to help with chores, complained about farm life, and pushed his father away. The weight of his behavior pressed down on him as he realized just how much his father had been shouldering alone. Emma placed a gentle hand on Jack's shoulder. "We'll figure something out. The whole town knows how hard you work, Jack. You're not in this alone." Dylan watched his father's shoulders slump slightly at Emma's touch, saw the vulnerability there that his dad usually kept hidden. It hit him then how much his father had sacrificed to keep their family's legacy alive, even while grieving for Mom. A movement at the end of the driveway caught their attention. Fred Morgan stood talking to a well-dressed man Dylan had never seen before. The stranger's expensive suit looked out of place against the dusty farm backdrop. Emma tensed. "That's Mr. Brown with Fred," she said quietly. Jack's expression hardened as he watched the 2 men in conversation. "You know him?" "By reputation," Emma replied, her voice tight. "He runs that traveling circus that was shut down for animal welfare violations last year." They shared a worried look as Fred gestured toward the barn, Mr. Brown nodding as he scribbled something in a small notebook. Dylan's earlier guilt transformed into determination. Whatever was happening, he wouldn't let his father face it alone anymore. He stepped into the kitchen, making his presence known. "Dad," he said firmly, "I want to help. With everything. The farm, the mare, whatever you need." Jack turned, surprise evident on his weathered face. Before he could respond, Emma's attention snapped back to the driveway. "They're heading this way," she warned quietly. Jack Parker strode down his gravel driveway, his boots crunching with each determined step. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farm as he approached Mr. Brown and Fred Morgan. Emma Thompson followed close behind, while Dylan watched anxiously from the porch. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Jack's voice carried an edge of steel beneath its polite surface. Mr. Brown turned, offering a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore an expensive suit that seemed to repel the farm dust around him, and his patent leather shoes gleamed incongruously against the dirt. "Mr. Parker, I presume?" Mr. Brown extended his hand, which Jack didn't take. "I apologize for the unexpected visit, but I'm here about a matter of some importance." Fred Morgan shifted uncomfortably beside Mr. Brown, avoiding Jack's gaze. "Show him the picture," Fred mumbled. Mr. Brown's smile tightened as he pulled out his phone. "One of my prize show horses went missing during a storm last week. Beautiful mare, distinctive brand. He held up the screen displaying a photo Fred had sent him. I believe you may have found her. Jack's jaw clenched. That horse stumbled onto my property half dead and pregnant. If she's yours, you've got some explaining to do about her condition. Ah, yes, Mr. Brown said smoothly. A unfortunate situation. She escaped during transport between shows. We've been searching everywhere. He took a step toward the barn. I'd like to see her now. No. Jack planted himself firmly between Mr. Brown and the barn. She's under veterinary care and not stable enough for visitors. Mr. Brown's pleasant facade cracked slightly. Mr. Parker, I have documentation proving ownership. That brand is registered to my circus. He patted his breast pocket. We can do this the easy way or what? Jack's voice was quiet, but dangerous. Emma Thompson stepped forward, her professional demeanor masking her anger. As the attending veterinarian, I can't allow any disruption to this mare's care. She's severely malnourished, dehydrated, and her pregnancy is high risk. She met Mr. Brown's gaze steadily. Moving her now could kill both her and the foal. Mr. Brown studied Emma for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Very well. I understand the delicacy of the situation. He straightened his tie. We'll wait until the mare is stable. But make no mistake, Mr. Parker. That horse is my property, and I will be back to claim her. Fred Morgan looked like he wanted to sink into the ground as Mr. Brown turned and walked back to his black car. The circus owner paused at the driver's door. I'll be in touch, he called over his shoulder, then slipped into the vehicle and drove away. Fred lingered, scuffing his boot in the dirt. Jack, I didn't mean... Get off my property, Fred, Jack said quietly, not looking at his neighbor. Emma touched Jack's arm as Fred hurried away. We bought some time, she murmured, but he'll be back. The early morning mist still clung to the ground as Jack Parker made his way to the barn. His boots left dark prints in the dewy grass, and his mind churned with worry about Mr. Brown's threats. As he approached the barn door, he heard soft murmuring from inside. Jack paused, then quietly pushed the door open. There stood Dylan, speaking in gentle tones to the mare, while brushing her coat with slow, careful strokes. The horse's ears were pricked forward, listening intently to the boy's words. You're getting stronger every day, girl, Dylan whispered, not noticing his father's presence. We won't let anyone take you away. Jack's throat tightened at the sight. It had been months since he'd seen his son show such tenderness toward anything. The mare nudged Dylan's shoulder affectionately, and the boy actually smiled. A real smile, not the sarcastic smirk he usually wore. You're up early, Jack said softly, not wanting to startle either of them. Dylan's shoulders tensed slightly, but he didn't stop brushing. She seemed restless. I thought maybe she was hungry. Jack nodded, moving closer to check the mare's water bucket. You gave her the right amount of feed? Yeah, I remembered what Emma showed us. Dylan paused, then added, Her coat's looking better. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, father and son on either side of the horse, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. It reminded Jack of simpler times before his wife's passing, when they'd all worked together in the barn. The moment was broken by Jack's phone ringing. Emma's name flashed on the screen. Jack! Emma's voice was tight with concern. Mr. Brown's been making rounds in town. He's offering a reward, a substantial one, for information about the mare. Jack's hand gripped the phone harder. How much? Enough to tempt people who are struggling. And Jack, he's been telling everyone you stole his horse. He's trying to turn the community against you. Dylan had stopped brushing, watching his father's face grow darker with each word. After what Fred did, Emma continued, I'm worried others might follow suit. Times are tough for everyone around here." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "Thanks for letting me know, Emma. We'll figure something out." As he hung up, he noticed Dylan's anxious expression. The boy's hand rested protectively on the mare's neck. "They can't take her, can they?" Dylan's voice cracked slightly. "Dad, she's getting better. She needs us." Jack moved to stand beside his son, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "I promise you, Dylan, I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe. We're not giving up on her." The mare nickered softly, as if understanding the weight of the moment. Dylan leaned against her neck, and Jack watched as his son's fingers curled protectively in her mane. In that quiet moment, Jack realized that saving this horse had become about more than just the animal itself. It was about saving his family, too. The afternoon sun beat down on Main Street as Jack's old pickup truck rattled into town. Dylan sat quietly beside him, his usual slouch replaced by a tense alertness. As they pulled into the grocery store parking lot, fragments of conversation drifted through their open windows. "Did you hear about the Parker's horse?" A woman in a floral dress whispered to her companion. "That circus man's offering $5,000 for information." "5,000?" Another voice chimed in. "In times like these, that's mighty tempting." Dylan's jaw clenched. Jack noticed his son's hands balling into fists and placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Easy there," he murmured. They climbed out of the truck, the gravel crunching beneath their boots. More whispers followed them as they approached the store entrance. "Poor Jack. First his wife, now this mess. But $5,000 could save someone's farm." Inside the store, the usual friendly atmosphere felt strained. Some folks avoided eye contact, while others offered sympathetic smiles. Mrs. Jenkins, who ran the register, gave them an encouraging nod. But her teenage assistant kept his head down, suddenly very interested in arranging candy bars. Dylan stuck close to his father as they gathered supplies, something he hadn't done since he was small. Jack noticed how his son's shoulders remained tight, his eyes darting around at every whispered conversation. As they loaded their cart with feed supplements and groceries, they overheard two farmers discussing the situation near the produce section. "That mare's probably worth more than that reward," one said. "Brown wouldn't offer unless he stood to gain more." "Still, it's not right what he's doing to Jack," the other replied. "Man's just trying to save a suffering animal." Outside the store, as they pushed their loaded cart across the parking lot, a familiar voice called out, "Jack, Dylan, wait up." Sarah Miller, who had been Jack's wife's closest friend, hurried toward them. Her kind face was flushed with determination as she reached them. "I've been hoping to catch you," she said, catching her breath. "Listen, some of us are putting together a fundraiser. Nothing huge, but maybe enough to help with the vet bills. Mary would have wanted us to help." And Jack felt his throat tighten at the mention of his late wife. "Sarah, you don't have to." "We want to," she insisted. "The whole quilting circle is involved, and Pete from the hardware store offered his lot for the event. Not everyone's forgotten what community means, Jack." Dylan, who had been silent throughout the exchange, spoke up. "Really? You'd do that?" Sarah's eyes softened as she looked at the boy. "Of course, honey. Your mama would have done the same for any of us." As they loaded the supplies into the truck bed, Jack noticed more townspeople watching them. Some nodded in greeting, while others quickly looked away. The weight of uncertainty hung heavy in the air, mixing uneasily with the small spark of hope Sarah had ignited. Dylan helped secure the last bag, then paused, his hand resting on the truck's tailgate. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think we'll be okay?" Jack looked at his son, seeing both fear and determination in his eyes. Before he could answer, another whispered conversation about the bounty drifted across the parking lot, a reminder that their troubles were far from over. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the barn as Emma Thompson moved the ultrasound wand carefully over the mare's swollen belly. After weeks of intensive care, the horse's coat had regained some shine, and her ribs were less prominent beneath her skin. Jack Parker stood nearby, his weathered hands clasped together, while Dylan leaned against the stall door, barely breathing as he waited for news. "Well," Emma said, a smile spreading across her face, "looks like our little fighter is getting stronger." She pointed to the screen where a distinct shape moved. "See that? The foal's heart rate is much more stable now." Jack released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Though the news was good, his eyes darted to the barn entrance, a habit he'd developed since Mr. Brown's appearance. Emma noticed his unease and patted his arm reassuringly. "One day at a time, Jack. That's all we can do." Throughout the following days, Dylan spent every spare moment with the mare. Where he once would have been slouched in his room with headphones on, he could now be found in the barn, talking softly to the horse as he brushed her coat or cleaned her stall. The transformation in his behavior was subtle, but unmistakable. One afternoon, Jack watched from the barn doorway as his son read aloud from a dog-eared paperback, something he hadn't seen Dylan do since before Mary's death. The mare's head was lowered near Dylan's shoulder, her ears pricked forward at the sound of his voice. "She likes the story," Dylan said, noticing his father. His usual defensive tone was absent, replaced by something softer. "I think she gets lonely sometimes. Like..." He trailed off, but Jack understood. Like me, the unspoken words hung between them. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Fred Morgan's rusty pickup truck pulled up outside the barn, and Dylan immediately tensed, moving protectively closer to the mare. Fred climbed out slowly, his usual confidence absent as he approached. He stopped several feet away, removing his cap and twisting it in his hands. "Jack," he said, nodding awkwardly. "Dylan!" His eyes flickered to the horse, then back to the ground. I came to say I'm sorry. About Brown, I mean. Didn't think it through. What it might mean to you folks." Jack studied his neighbor's face, searching for any sign of deception. Fred Morgan had never been one for apologies in all the years they'd known each other. "Saw how the boy's been with her," Fred continued, gesturing toward Dylan. "Reminds me of my own kids when they were younger, before we lost our farm. Should have known better than to mess with something like that." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sounds of the mare's breathing and the distant call of birds. Jack felt Dylan's eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond. The summer heat shimmered over the fairgrounds as Emma Thompson helped Jack and Dylan Parker set up their presentation booth. Colorful banners promoting animal welfare fluttered in the breeze, and the excited chatter of families filled the air. "Are you sure about this?" Jack asked Emma, his voice tight with concern. "What if Brown finds out how well she's doing?" Emma adjusted a poster showing the mare's progress photos. "The community needs to see what we've accomplished. Trust me, Jack, sometimes the best defense is having people on your side." Dylan stood nearby, fidgeting with the note cards Emma had helped him prepare. His usual slouch was gone, replaced by nervous energy as he practiced his speech under his breath. When their turn came to present, the crowd gathered around their small stage. Dylan stepped up to the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. But as soon as he began speaking about the night they found the mare, his voice grew stronger. "She was so weak she could barely stand," Dylan said, pointing to the first photo. "But Dad and Emma never gave up on her. They taught me that sometimes the things worth fighting for are the hardest things to save." The audience leaned in, captivated by the teenager's unexpected eloquence. Several people wiped tears away as Dylan described the mare's recovery and the upcoming birth of her foal. "She's not just a horse anymore," Dylan continued, his voice cracking slightly. "She's family, and sometimes family comes in ways you never expect." Jack watched his son with pride swelling in his chest, but movement at the edge of the crowd caught his attention. Mr. Brown stood partially hidden behind a cotton candy stand, his expression calculating as he observed the presentation. The circus owner's presence sent a chill down Jack's spine despite the summer heat. As the crowd dispersed after Dylan's speech, Fred Morgan approached Mr. Brown. The two men stood in the shadow of a nearby oak tree, their conversation hidden from most fairgoers but visible to Jack. "You saw how much that horse means to them," Fred said, gesturing toward the Parkers. "Surely there are other horses you could—" Mr. Brown cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Morgan. I have my own plans for that mare and her foal." He turned away, leaving Fred standing alone beneath the tree. The warm applause and congratulations from their neighbors couldn't quite dispel the unease that settled over Jack as he watched Mr. Brown's retreating figure. Emma squeezed his arm supportively, but even her reassuring presence couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. The morning dew hadn't yet burned off when Jack Parker noticed something unsettling during his routine barn check. Fresh footprints marked the muddy ground near the back entrance, prints that didn't belong to any of them. His stomach tightened as he followed their path, discovering they circled the entire structure. "Dylan!" he called out, his voice sharp with urgency. "Come take a look at this." Dylan emerged from the house, still pulling on his jacket. When Jack pointed out the tracks, the teenager's face darkened. "You think it's Brown?" "Could be, or someone working for him." Jack ran a hand through his graying hair. "We need to set up some protection." They spent the morning rigging up what security they could afford. Dylan climbed the ladder to install motion sensor lights while Jack mounted battery-powered alarms on the doors. Inside, the mare watched them work, her belly now visibly swollen with the growing foal. "What if they try to take her at night?" Dylan asked, testing one of the sensors. "Then they'll have to get through us first," Jack replied, his jaw set with determination. Around noon, Emma Thompson's pickup truck rattled up the driveway. She found Jack pacing the barn's perimeter, checking their makeshift security for the third time that day. "I heard about the footprints," she said, setting down her medical bag. "Jack, you need to be careful. Brown isn't the type to give up easily, but you can't take the law into your own hands." "What law?" Jack's voice was bitter. "The police said, without proof of ownership, there's nothing they can do. We're on our own here." Emma placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Just promise me you won't try to handle this alone if he shows up. Call me immediately, no matter what time it is." After examining the mare, Emma pulled Dylan aside. "Watch your father," she whispered. "He's worried sick, and worried men sometimes make rash decisions." That evening, Jack and Dylan dragged old sleeping bags into the barn's office. The small room offered a clear view of both entrances, and the new lights cast sharp shadows across the yard. "Remember when Mom used to camp with us in the back field?" Dylan asked quietly, smoothing out his sleeping bag. Jack paused, surprised by the rare mention of his late wife. She always insisted on telling ghost stories, even though they scared you half to death. "They did not," Dylan protested, but a small smile played at his lips. As night settled over the farm, father and son sat in companionable silence, listening to the mare's soft breathing from her stall. The security lights cast a protective glow, and their shared vigil felt like a bridge slowly rebuilding between them. "Dad," Dylan's voice was hesitant in the darkness, "we're not going to let them take her, right?" "No, son," Jack replied firmly. "We're not." The mare nickered softly, as if understanding their promise, while father and son prepared for their first night of many watching over their precious charge. The night wrapped around the barn like a thick blanket, broken only by the pale glow of the security lights. Jack Parker shifted uncomfortably on his folding chair, while Dylan Parker sat cross-legged on his sleeping bag, occasionally checking his phone for the time. The mare's steady breathing provided a gentle rhythm to their quiet vigil. Just past midnight, a twig snapped outside. Jack's head jerked up, and Dylan quickly pocketed his phone. They exchanged glances, frozen in place, as they listened intently. The sound of careful footsteps crunching on gravel reached their ears. Jack's hand found the pitchfork leaning against the wall, his other palm wrapping around a heavy-duty flashlight. His heart pounded against his ribs as the footsteps drew closer. Dylan rose silently to his feet, positioning himself between the door and the mare's stall. The old barn door creaked open slowly, letting in a slash of moonlight. Mr. Brown's tall figure filled the doorway, his expensive shoes incongruous with the hay-strewn floor. Now, Mr. Brown said smoothly, holding up his hands. No need for weapons. I'm just here to check on my investment. Your investment? Jack's voice was low and dangerous. This is private property, and you're trespassing. Dylan's hands balled into fists as he stood his ground. The mare stirred restlessly in her stall, picking up on the tension. I simply want to ensure the horse is receiving proper care, Mr. Brown continued, taking another step forward. After all, she's carrying valuable cargo. Get out, Dylan snapped, his teenage bravado masking his fear. You have no right to be here. Mr. Brown's polite facade cracked slightly. I have every right. That horse belongs to my circus, and I can prove it. Before Jack could respond, bright headlights swept across the barn's interior. Car doors slammed outside, and Emma Thompson's voice rang out clearly. Is everything all right in there? She appeared behind Mr. Brown, still wearing her pajamas under a hastily thrown-on coat. Her arrival seemed to deflate some of the tension, though Jack didn't lower the pitchfork. Mr. Brown's smile turned cold. Well, isn't this cozy? The whole gang's here. He straightened his jacket. Don't worry, I'm leaving. But mark my words, I'll handle this the right way from now on, through proper channels. He backed away slowly, his shoes clicking against the concrete barn floor. Emma watched him go, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I got the alert from the motion sensor, she explained once Mr. Brown's car engine faded into the distance. I figured it wasn't a false alarm. Jack finally lowered the pitchfork, his hands shaking slightly. Dylan sagged against the stall door, and the mare pressed her nose against his back, offering quiet comfort. He's not going to give up, Jack said, running a hand through his hair. No, Emma agreed, but neither are we. Late summer heat shimmered across the farm as Emma Thompson's truck pulled up to the barn. The past weeks had brought subtle changes to the mare. Her belly had grown rounder, her movements more deliberate. Jack Parker watched anxiously as Emma prepared her equipment for the latest round of tests. We're entering the most critical period, Emma explained, running gentle hands along the mare's swollen flanks. The next few weeks will determine everything. She paused, meeting Jack's worried gaze. I won't sugarcoat it. This is when complications are most likely to occur. Jack nodded, his throat tight. The stack of unpaid bills in his office drawer seemed to weigh heavier with each passing day. Though the mare's health had improved dramatically under their care, the mounting costs of specialized feed and medical treatments had stretched his resources to the breaking point. I've seen worse cases pull through, Emma added softly, noticing his expression. She's strong, and she's fighting for that foal. Before Jack could respond, the crunch of tires on gravel announced another visitor. Fred Morgan's weathered pickup rolled to a stop outside the barn. Jack's shoulders tensed as his former friend approached, boots scuffing against the concrete floor. Jack, Fred nodded, hovering uncertainly by the entrance. Got some news you should hear. He glanced at Emma, who continued her examination while keeping an ear on the conversation. Mr. Brown's hired himself a fancy lawyer from the city, Fred continued. Been asking around town about the horse's condition, gathering information. He shifted uncomfortably. Look, I know I messed up telling him about her in the first place. I'm trying to make it right. Jack studied Fred's face, searching for signs of deception. The older man's remorse seemed genuine, but trust, once broken, wasn't easily restored. Why should we believe anything you say? Dylan's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from behind a hay bale. His eyes blazed with protective fury. You sold us out once already. Fred flinched at the accusation, but held his ground. Because I've seen what this horse means to you, son. To all of you. He gestured at the mare. I've been talking to Mr. Brown, trying to make him understand. If he could see how much you care for her. We won't let him take her, Dylan declared firmly. She's part of our family now. Fred's expression softened. That's exactly what I've been telling him. A man like Brown, he understands business, but maybe, just maybe, he'll understand heart too if he sees it clearly enough. Emma finished her examination, wiping her hands on a towel. The tension in the barn hung thick as morning fog, filled with unspoken fears and fragile hopes. The mare nickered softly, drawing Dylan to her side like a magnet. I'm trying to help, Fred said quietly, whether you believe me or not. Jack Parker sat stiffly in the hard wooden chair across from Mr. Henderson's desk at First Regional Bank. The banker shuffled through the stack of papers, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. Afternoon sun streamed through the window, highlighting the worry lines etched deep in Jack's face. Jack, you know I want to help, Mr. Henderson said, setting the papers down with a gentle sigh. Your family's been banking with us for 3 generations. But these numbers, he shook his head. Without additional collateral, I just can't justify the refinancing. Jack's shoulders slumped. He'd known it was a long shot, but hearing the words out loud made his stomach twist. I understand, he managed, his voice rough. Thanks for taking the time to look it over. The walk to his truck felt endless. Each step reminded him of everything he stood to lose. Not just the farm, but generations of Parker family history. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical burden. Back at the farm, Emma Thompson's familiar pickup was parked by the barn. She took one look at his face as he approached and knew the news wasn't good. The bank turned you down? She asked softly, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the barn. Jack nodded, unable to find words. Inside, the mare nickered a greeting, and despite everything, the sound warmed something in his chest. You know, Emma said carefully, I've been thinking about how much support we got at the fair. People really connected with her story. She paused, watching Jack's reaction. What if we tried a crowdfunding campaign? Or maybe another community fundraiser, but bigger this time? Jack's pride bristled at the suggestion. I can't ask people for handouts. It's not handouts, Emma interrupted firmly. This horse, she's become more than just your rescue project. She's bringing people together, giving them something to believe in. You saw how they responded at the fair. Dylan emerged from the mare's stall, having overheard the conversation. She's right, Dad. Everyone keeps asking me how she's doing. They want to help. Jack looked between them, then at the mare. Her coat gleamed with health now, so different from the desperate creature they'd found in the storm. But her care had drained his resources dry. I could help set up the online campaign, Emma offered, and Dylan's got a knack for telling her story. We could share updates, photos, really let people feel connected to her journey. Jack ran a hand through his hair, wrestling with his instinct to handle everything alone. The mare pressed her nose against his shoulder, as if sensing his distress. Okay, he finally said, the word feeling foreign in his mouth. Okay, we can try it, but I don't want anyone feeling pressured. Let us handle the details, Emma said, already pulling out her phone. Sometimes accepting help isn't a weakness, Jack. Sometimes it's what makes a community stronger. Dylan's face lit up with determination. I'll start working on the story right now. People need to know everything she's overcome. Emma Thompson set up her camera in the barn's soft morning light while Dylan Parker nervously practiced his lines. Jack Parker stood off to the side, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, watching with a mixture of hope and unease. Just speak from your heart, Emma encouraged Dylan. Tell them what she means to you. The camera rolled, capturing the mare's gentle presence in the background. Dylan's voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as he spoke. After we lost Mom, everything felt dark. Dad and I, we kind of lost each other too. He reached out to stroke the mare's neck. But then this horse showed up in our barn during a storm. She was scared and hurt, just like us. Jack Parker shifted uncomfortably as Dylan continued, sharing intimate details of their struggles. But watching his son's face light up while describing the mare's recovery, he remained silent. Emma expertly edited the footage, weaving in photos of the mare's transformation, from the skeletal, rain-soaked creature they'd found to the healthy, expectant mother she'd become. The final video showed the community's involvement. Local kids bringing carrots, neighbors helping repair the barn roof, Emma's dedicated veterinary care. Within hours of posting, responses flooded in. Local news stations shared the story. Comments poured in from around the country, many accompanied by donations. The town's coffee shop set up a collection jar. The feed store offered a discount on supplies. Even the hardware store owner, who'd been skeptical of Jack's ability to pay his tab, called to offer store credit. At his kitchen table, Fred Morgan watched the video 3 times, tears in his eyes. With trembling fingers, he made an anonymous donation of $500, his entire month's savings. The gesture wouldn't erase his betrayal, but it was something. Across town, in his hotel room, Mr. Brown's face reddened as he watched the viral video. His fingers clenched around his phone as Dylan described finding scars on the mare, clear evidence of abuse. Comments below called for investigation into the circus's treatment of animals. "Lies!" he shouted, hurling his coffee cup against the wall. "They're turning my own horse against me." He jabbed at his phone, calling his lawyer. "I want them shut down immediately. File whatever we need to file. That horse is mine, and they're destroying my reputation." The lawyer's cautious response only fueled his rage. "I don't care about public sentiment. Get me that horse back, or I'll handle this myself." In the barn, unaware of Mr. Brown's fury, Dylan read supportive messages aloud to the mare, while Jack and Emma tracked the rising donation total with amazement. "People really care," Dylan said softly, his hand resting on the mare's swollen belly. "They want to help us save you and your baby." Jack nodded, touched by the outpouring of support, but unable to shake a nagging sense of dread. Something told him their fight was far from over. The late summer air hung heavy with moisture as Emma Thompson methodically arranged supplies in the barn. She lined up sterile towels, antiseptic solution, and emergency medications on a clean wooden table while explaining each item's purpose to Dylan Parker, who listened with rapt attention. "We need to be ready for anything," Emma said, adjusting a heat lamp above the freshly bedded stall. "First-time mothers can be unpredictable, especially given her condition when she arrived." Jack Parker spread thick straw across the floor, his movements precise but tense. The mare's restless pacing and occasional tail swishing hadn't escaped his notice. Neither had the way she kept pressing her side against the stall wall, early signs that labor might not be far off. "How long do you think?" Dylan asked, helping Emma organize cord clamps and scissors. "Could be hours, could be days," Emma replied. "But we'll stay close just in case." The barn door creaked open, and Fred Morgan's weathered face appeared. His usual confident demeanor had crumbled, replaced by evident distress. "Jack, I need to talk to you. It's important." Jack's jaw tightened, but he followed Fred outside. The humidity made it hard to breathe as Fred wrung his hands, speaking in a rush. "Mr. Brown's got it all planned out. He's waiting for the foal to be born. Says it's valuable circus stock, being from his best performer." Fred's voice cracked. "He's got papers proving ownership, Jack. He's going to come for them both as soon as he hears the foal's arrived." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. "You brought this on us, Fred. You brought that man here." "I know, and I'm sorry. I was desperate. But watching that horse heal, seeing how she's helped your boy..." Fred's eyes welled with tears. "I was wrong, Jack. Dead wrong." Inside the barn, Emma organized a schedule on a notepad. "We'll need someone with her constantly. I'll take the overnight shift, but we should rotate during the day." Dylan immediately volunteered for the early morning hours, while Jack, still seething from Fred's confession, agreed to the afternoon watch. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm rolling in, much like the night they'd found the mare. Emma checked the mare's vital signs one more time, noting everything appeared stable despite the approaching labor. She set up her sleeping bag in the corner of the barn, ready for a long night ahead. "The weather's turning," Jack observed, glancing at the darkening sky through the barn window, "just like that first night." Dylan brought extra flashlights and batteries from the house, arranging them strategically around the stall. The mare nickered softly as he passed, and he paused to stroke her neck. "We won't let anything happen to you," he whispered. "I promise." The first fat drops of rain began to hit the roof as Emma settled in for a watch, a medical kit within easy reach. Jack and Dylan prepared to take turns checking in throughout the night, their determination to protect the mare stronger than ever, despite Fred's ominous warning. Lightning crackled across the midnight sky as the mare's legs trembled beneath her. Emma Thompson moved with practiced efficiency in the barn, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. "She's starting active labor," Emma announced, pulling on sterile gloves. "Jack, keep her head calm. Dylan, stay by her flank with me." The mare's breathing grew labored, her sides heaving with each contraction. Thunder boomed overhead, making the barn's timbers shake. Dylan's hands trembled as he held the flashlight, illuminating Emma's work area. "Just like the night we found her," Jack murmured, stroking the mare's sweaty neck. She pressed her head against his chest, seeking comfort as another contraction racked her body. Emma's face grew taut with concern as she checked the mare's progress. "Something's not right," she said, reaching for her medical kit. "The foal's position is wrong. We need to act fast." Dylan's eyes widened with fear. "What's happening? Is she going to be okay?" "I need my emergency C-section kit from the truck," Emma said, her voice tight. "Jack, hold her steady. Dylan, run and get it. It's in the red case behind the driver's seat." Dylan bolted into the storm, rain pelting his face as he sprinted to Emma's truck. His hands shook so badly he could barely open the door. "Please don't die," he whispered, thinking of both mare and foal. "Please, please don't die." Back in the barn, the mare's legs buckled. Jack braced her weight, his muscles straining as Emma worked frantically to reposition the foal. Dylan returned, soaked but clutching the red case. "She's crashing," Emma warned, her forearms deep in surgical gloves. "We have to get this foal out now." The mare let out a desperate whinny that pierced through the storm's fury. Dylan grabbed her halter, tears streaming down his face. "Fight, girl. You have to fight." Emma's movements became a blur of focused intensity. Jack held the mare steady, his own heart pounding as he watched the vet work. Minutes stretched like hours until finally, with one last mighty effort, the foal slipped into the world. The mare's legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto the straw, her breathing shallow and rapid. Emma immediately began administering medications while Jack and Dylan toweled off the tiny foal. "Come on, old girl," Emma murmured, checking vital signs. "Stay with us." Gradually, the mare's breathing steadied. The foal, still wet and wobbly, lifted its head and let out a tiny whinny. Tears of relief spilled down Dylan's cheeks as he watched mother and baby connect for the first time. "They made it," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "They both made it." Emma sat back on her heels, exhausted but smiling, as she watched the mare nuzzle her newborn foal. Outside, the storm began to fade, as if nature itself was celebrating the miraculous delivery. The barn fell into an exhausted quiet, broken only by the soft nickering between mare and foal. Emma Thompson wiped sweat from her brow as she continued monitoring the mare's vital signs, while Jack Parker gathered fresh straw for bedding. The storm outside had settled into a gentle rain, pattering against the roof. Dylan Parker knelt beside the newborn foal, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch its velvet-soft muzzle. The tiny creature lifted its head, dark eyes blinking with curiosity. Tears streamed down Dylan's cheeks as he watched mother and baby bond. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice catching. "Just like her mom." Jack Parker paused his work, watching his son's gentle interaction with the foal. For a moment, the weight of their financial troubles and legal uncertainties lifted, replaced by pure joy. But the peace was short-lived. The barn door burst open with a bang. Mr. Brown strode in, flanked by two men in expensive suits. His polished shoes clicked against the wooden floor as he approached the stall. "I see I've arrived just in time," Mr. Brown announced, his voice cutting through the tender atmosphere. "That foal belongs to my circus, along with its mother." Dylan Parker jumped to his feet, positioning himself between Mr. Brown and the horses. "No, you can't have them!" His voice cracked with emotion. "They need each other." Jack Parker moved to stand beside his son, despite his exhaustion from the night's ordeal. "Mr. Brown, that mare nearly died tonight. She's in no condition to be moved." Emma Thompson stepped forward, her medical authority evident in her stance. "As their attending veterinarian, I strongly advise against any attempt to separate or transport these horses." Mr. Brown's expression remained stern as he surveyed the scene. His eyes landed on Dylan Parker, who had tears streaming down his face as he protectively guarded the mare and foal. The boy's hand rested on the mare's neck, and she leaned into his touch, trusting and calm despite the tension in the barn. Something shifted in Mr. Brown's expression as he watched this interaction. The hardness in his eyes softened slightly, and his shoulders dropped their rigid posture. Mr. Brown began, then paused. He looked at the exhausted mare, the wobbly foal, and the tearful boy who clearly loved them both. Running a hand over his face, he took a step back. "I need time to think about this." Without another word, Mr. Brown turned and walked out of the barn, leaving his entourage to hurry after him. The sound of car doors slamming and engines starting broke through the quiet of the early morning. The morning sun filtered through the barn windows, casting warm patches of light across the straw-covered floor. The mare lay contentedly in her stall, her newborn foal nestled against her side. Jack Parker leaned against the stall door, watching as the gangly creature attempted to stand on wobbly legs. "Easy there, little one," he murmured as the foal stumbled and caught itself. Emma Thompson knelt beside them, her stethoscope moving carefully across the mare's chest. "Both heart rates are strong and steady," Emma announced with a tired smile. "The mare's recovery is remarkable, considering everything she went through last night." Dylan Parker sat cross-legged in the clean straw, his eyes never leaving the pair. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night, but his face glowed with joy every time the foal looked his way. The peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Jack Parker tensed as Mr. Brown appeared in the doorway, this time accompanied only by Fred Morgan. The circus owner's demeanor had changed dramatically from the previous night. His shoulders were relaxed, his expression softer. "Mr. Parker," he began, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "I owe you and your family an apology." Mr. Brown stepped closer to the stall, watching as the foal finally managed to stand, its spindly legs trembling with effort. "I came here thinking only of profit, what that mare could bring in for my circus. But seeing your boy with her last night," he shook his head, "well, it reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. It wasn't about money then. It was about the connection between people and animals." Fred Morgan shuffled his feet, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry too, Jack. I should have never gotten involved." Mr. Brown reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "These are all the ownership papers and documentation I had on the mare." Without hesitation, he tore the papers in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. "She's where she belongs now. And if you ever want to put on a show at the county fair or something similar, I'd be honored to help organize it." Jack Parker's shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. Dylan Parker's face broke into a wide smile as he realized what this meant. The mare and foal were truly theirs to keep. "Thank you," Jack said simply, extending his hand to Mr. Brown, who shook it firmly. The foal chose that moment to take its first successful steps, wobbling toward Dylan Parker with curious determination. The mare watched calmly, seeming to understand that her baby was safe in the boy's gentle hands. Crisp autumn leaves skittered across the pasture as Jack Parker leaned against the weathered fence, watching the foal prance around its mother. The mare's coat gleamed in the afternoon sun, a far cry from the desperate creature they'd found in the barn during that stormy night months ago. Her recovery seemed almost miraculous, though Jack knew it had more to do with endless hours of care, Emma Thompson's expertise, and Dylan Parker's unwavering dedication. The farm itself showed similar signs of renewal. Thanks to the viral fundraising campaign and growing community support, Jack had managed to repair the aging barn roof, install new fencing, and even purchase some essential equipment. The mortgage payments were finally manageable, and for the first time in years, he felt hope taking root alongside the fresh grass in his fields. But the greatest transformation wasn't in the buildings or the bank account. It was in Dylan Parker. Jack watched his son lead the foal through gentle training exercises, speaking to it in soft, encouraging tones. Gone was the angry, withdrawn teenager of months past. In his place stood a young man with purpose and compassion. The crunch of gravel announced Emma Thompson's arrival. She climbed out of her truck with a bright smile, clutching a folder full of papers. "You won't believe the response we've gotten," she called out, striding toward them. "The community center wants to partner with us for a children's therapy program. They're offering to help with the setup costs, and they already have a waiting list of kids who could benefit from working with the horses." Dylan Parker jogged over from the paddock, his face flushed with excitement. "Really? Could I help with that?" he asked, then quickly glanced at his father. "I mean, if that's okay." Jack Parker felt his throat tighten with emotion. Just months ago, Dylan Parker would have scoffed at the idea of taking on more responsibility at the farm. Now here he was, volunteering to help others find the same healing he'd discovered. "I think you'd be perfect for it," Jack said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You've got a real gift with these horses." Dylan Parker ducked his head, but Jack caught the pleased smile on his face. The foal whinnied from the pasture, and they all turned to watch as it galloped alongside its mother, both horses strong and free in the autumn light. Emma Thompson moved to stand beside them, her presence warm and steady. Together, they watched the horses run, their hooves drumming a rhythm of hope across the recovering land. The mare's story had touched so many lives, bringing healing not just to herself and her foal, but to a father and son who had lost their way, and to a community that had rediscovered its heart. If you enjoyed the story of Jack, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.